rolled down his long dirt road, smooth as oil against gravel, and out stepped a woman walking with a cane, scar faint but visible on her temple, eyes sharp, posture unbroken. And when she introduced herself as Claire, Elijah barely recognized her without the blood and smoke, and she looked around at the sagging barn, the tired house, the land holding on by will alone, and she said quietly, "You saved my life." And Elijah waved it off, embarrassed. But Claire didn't come to thank him. She came to understand him, to ask why he hadn't sold when everyone else did, why he stayed when it hurt. And he told her about his grandfather buying the land after fighting in a segregated army, about promises written into soil, about how quitting felt like betrayal. And Claire listened in a way people with money rarely do. And before she left, she handed him a card and said, "If you ever need help, call." And Elijah nodded, not believing help ever truly comes. But then help arrived anyway in ways he didn't expect, because suddenly inspectors returned, this time fair. Grants appeared he never knew existed. The bank delayed foreclosure without explanation. A local paper ran a feature, not about the crash, but about Elijah. And rumors spread that someone powerful was quietly pulling strings. And when Elijah finally swallowed his pride and called the number, Claire answered herself, and she told him the truth. The crash wasn't mechanical failure. It was sabotage. Someone wanted her dead because she'd refused to sell her company to a defense conglomerate that thrived on war. And that conglomerate also happened to be the same corporate entity buying farmland across the county, including Elijah's neighbors, planning to seize water rights beneath his soil. And suddenly Elijah realized his land wasn't just sentimental. It was strategic, and Claire offered him a deal. She'd invest, rebuild his farm with sustainable tech, protect it legally, and in return, he'd let her use a portion of the dial land for a small private research facility disguised as agricultural development. And Elijah hesitated, burned too many times. But Claire looked him dead in the eye and said, "They didn't expect me to live, and they didn't expect you to matter. But you do." And so Elijah agreed, not knowing that decision would put him in danger, because trucks started driving past at night, strangers asking questions, threats masked as offers. And one evening, his barn was set on fire, barely saved. A message sent loud and clear, and fear crept in. But so did resolve, because Claire didn't disappear. She doubled down, security increased, lawyers descended, whistleblowers surfaced, and the truth began leaking to journalists brave enough to run it. And as months passed, Elijah's farm transformed, not into some soulless facility, but into a model of what farming could be. Profitable, ethical, Black-owned, resilient. And when federal hearings finally exposed the conglomerate's crimes, including attempted murder, land theft, and environmental poisoning, the nation watched. And at the center of it all was a quiet farmer who never wanted fame, who only wanted to keep his grandfather's land. And when reporters asked Claire why she trusted Elijah, she said, "Because when I had nothing but my life left, he gave me his hands." And when they asked Elijah how it felt to stand beside a millionaire, he said, "Money didn't save her. I did." And in the end, Elijah didn't just keep his farm, he expanded it, created jobs, trained young farmers who looked like him, and turned a place meant to be erased into a symbol of endurance. And on the anniversary of the crash, Elijah and Claire stood in the same field, wind moving gently through healthy crops, and she thanked him again. And he finally smiled and said, "Guess God knew where to land you." And if you're still listening now, remember this. History isn't always changed by the powerful. It's changed by the overlooked who choose courage when no one is to be watching. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, don't forget to subscribe, because this was just one field, one man, one choice. And there are many more waiting to be uncovered. Listen close, because before this story even begins, I need you to do one thing. If you believe ordinary people can still change destiny, if you believe hidden truth lives behind broken fences and tired hands, hit subscribe right now, because this story will stay with you long after it ends. And it begins on a forgotten stretch of American farmland where hope had nearly died. On a cracked piece of soil, owned by a struggling black farmer named Elijah Freeman, a man whose hands were rough from decades of work and whose spirit had been worn thin by a system that never seemed designed for him to win. And Elijah's days all looked the same. Wake before dawn, pray quietly at the kitchen table beside overdue bills. Step out into fields that once belonged to his grandfather, but now felt like they were slipping through his fingers. Banks calling, taxes stacking, neighbors selling out, corporations circling like vultures. And on this particular morning, the sky was low and gray. The kind of a sky that presses down on your chest, and Elijah was walking his eastern field checking a broken irrigation line when he heard a sound that didn't belong. A tearing scream of metal and air that split the clouds open. And before he could even think, a small plane burst through the fog, clipped the edge of his windmill, spiraled like a wounded bird, and slammed into his soybean field with a force that shook the ground and knocked him flat, dirt in his mouth, ears ringing, heart pounding, and for a long second all there was silence. Then fire crackling and a weak, desperate cry coming from the wreckage, and Elijah didn't hesitate. Not for fear, not for lawsuits, not for the fact that he had no insurance, not for the quiet voice in his head that said trouble always finds men like you. He ran, coughing through smoke, tearing at twisted metal with bare hands until he saw her, a woman unconscious, blood on her forehead, expensive flight jacket torn, breathing shallow but alive. And Elijah lifted her with a gentleness that surprised even him, carried her out just as flames swallowed the cockpit, laid her on the ground, wrapped his jacket around her, and called 911 on a phone with a cracked screen and minutes left on the plan. And as sirens wailed in the distance, Elijah sat there holding pressure on her wound, whispering prayers his mother taught him, not knowing that in that moment his life had already split into a before and an after, because the woman lying in his arms was not named Claire Whitmore. And by the next day, every news channel in America would be saying her name with reverence, calling her an aviation tech prodigy, a self-made millionaire, the heir to a quiet empire built on satellites, defense contracts, and private air innovation. Though Elijah wouldn't learn that yet, all he knew was that she survived, that ambulances took her away, that investigators swarmed his land, that the FAA grounded him from entering his own fields for days, and that when the cameras finally arrived, they didn't come for him. They came for the wreckage. And when a reporter finally stuck a mic in his face and asked how it felt to save a stranger's life, Elijah shrugged and said, "It felt like the right thing." And then they were gone, leaving him with trampled crops, burned soil, and no compensation. And the bank notices kept coming, red ink screaming foreclosure, and weeks passed, winter pressed in, and Elijah assumed that was the end of it. Another good deed, swallowed by silence. Until one afternoon, a black SUV,